Love and romance are in the air. It's Pride Month, everyone, and to celebrate all the different types of romance, or in my case, lack of romance, I suppose, we're going to be talking about romance in Dungeons and Dragons. Romance is something that can create a really interesting plotline in your D&D games. It can build inter-party roleplay and really be one of the best parts of your D&D campaign. And as we've seen from multiple RPG horror stories, it can also be the absolute worst part of your D&D campaign if not done right. I wanted to do a video on romance, a full video on D&D romance for a while, but for obvious reasons, I wanted to give it some time to simmer in my brain because I'm not very experienced in this kind of thing. I wanted to give the best advice that I could. So, today I have come with these 4 tips to make your D&D romances the best they can be. Without further ado, let's get started. Okay, so you, my fellow player, you have decided that you want to romance somebody in your D&D campaign. What is your first step? Well, your first step is to talk about it. What do I mean by that? Well, out of character, I think that you should talk to the person, or people maybe, I don't know, that you want to romance. And I think that this is a very, very important. I know that this is, definitely a form of metagaming, but it's not metagaming in a bad way. Look, it might be very awkward to just randomly have your character start flirting with another individual at the table. Even if your characters are friends, it might catch the other player off guard. So, the best thing that you can do, first things first, is just to ask them. Like, do you want to do a romance at this D&D game? Are you interested in this sort of relationship for our characters? That is very important for another big reason. It also ensures that the person is comfortable with this romance. You don't know for certain whether or not the other person will be comfortable romancing your character. It's impossible to read minds, so it's always good just to ask. In no uncertain terms, walk up to the person or just text them and ask, like, hey, are you interested in doing a romance between our characters? This also goes for the Dungeon Master. This happened in my own D&D game. One of my players, she was playing a blood hunter named Daphne, and she wanted to romance one of my NPCs, Kalia, who you'll probably meet in the video next month. And my table often shipped the two characters, often joked about them being roommates or whatever, but, you know, there was never anything confirmed. But despite that, she still asked me if I was interested in doing a romance with her character. And I said, yeah, what the hell? Yeah, I think that that can be really fun. And I was really grateful that she asked me that. I would have been a bumbling fool if she just started romancing Kalia out of, well, maybe not out of nowhere, but it would have caught me off guard and the story wouldn't have been nearly as good. I also appreciate that she checked to see if I was comfortable doing a romantic subplot. For obvious reasons, I may not be, and the fact that she asked really showed that she cared. And that will also show that you care as well. If you really want to do a romance, that is the first step. Just to talk to the person. Hey, maybe even talk to your dungeon master while we're at it. If you tell your dungeon master, hey, me and so want to do a romantic subplot together, could you set up moments for us? That could build your romance even more. Having the DM and the other players in on it can make it all the better. So yeah, open communication is really, really key in a lot of Dungeons & Dragons stuff, but especially when you want to do a romantic plot for your Dungeons & Dragons games. Okay, so you've got the communication down. What's the next step? Well, the next step is to make sure that you separate yourself from your character. Now, I know that this will seem very obvious, and yeah, it is to a degree. You're not romancing the player, you're romancing the character. You're not being romanced, your character is being romanced. I know to you guys this is really obvious because you guys watch Crispy's Tavern and that makes you guys awesome. But of course there are some people that just can't do that, hence the RPG horror stories. But it is a really important step, and I think it goes beyond just being aware that you, the person, aren't being romanced. It goes to a more specific degree when it comes to romantic subplots. Like, for example, romances aren't going to be all sunshine and rainbows. There may be some friction in the plot line, and if you are too connected to your character, you might take that out on the player rather than the character that you're romancing, which is really, really bad. take Ford and Jester for example. Ford and Jester had a long-standing, slow-burn romance through all of Campaign 2. I mean, how long was Jester trying to romance Ford? Like 100 episodes or something like that? It took a long time. And Laura Bailey didn't get frustrated with her real-life husband, Travis Willingham, when his character wasn't immediately hooking up with Jester, because it made sense for both of them, and it made for a more interesting plot. She didn't get upset. The same thing goes for my D&D campaign. I thought it would be interesting for there to be friction between Kalia and Daphne, especially since Kalia had a lot of baggage in her past, and I thought it natural that that would come up during a romantic subplot, and I think it made the plot all the better for both characters. Of course, this baggage meant that there was some friction. Sometimes Kalia was kind of reserved, very pulled away from Daphne, very emotionally unavailable sometimes, and obviously, like, that is a negative thing. That is bad for a relationship, but Daphne's player Kyla didn't get mad at me, Crispy. She also didn't get mad at Kalia, the character, either. It was a very sweet moment in the game, one of my favorite roleplay moments I've ever done. But look, the point is, she didn't get upset at me, the player, for doing that. She didn't get upset because she understood that I was trying to build the story. I wasn't trying to attack her, the player, or ruin this romantic subplot that we were building together. She understood we were working together to create an interesting story. She didn't slam her fist against the table and go, "Really, Crispy?" You know, like some other players that I can mention. Look, anyway, let's focus on the positive here. I think that when you separate yourself from the character, you can have a really awesome time doing this romance at the table. Now, of course, remember, just because you're playing characters, that does not give you an excuse to do creepy or bad things just because you're playing a character. It's really not that bad, right? No. Rule number 1 of Dungeons & Dragons, at least for me and I think for everyone else, is that we should be having fun. D&D should be fun for everyone at the table, and it's really hard to have fun if somebody's being creepy and making people uncomfortable. Just because you're playing a character doesn't give you an excuse to make other people uncomfortable or to cross lines that shouldn't be crossed just because you're playing a character. That is a big no-no when it comes to D&D romances, and I think romances in general. If you're wondering how you can make sure people are comfortable, well, safety tools can really help with that, and of course, just having candid conversations. Talk about it. I mean, when I was doing this whole friction thing with Kalia and Daphne's romance, I talked to Kyla, the player behind Daphne, to make sure that I wasn't, like, crossing any lines. I mean, I know Kyla, she's a very good friend of mine, but I can't read her mind. I don't know everything about her. What if she's uncomfortable with this sort of plotline? So, we talked about it briefly, and we concluded that yes, this will build a more interesting story, and hence we moved on, and I thought it really worked out for us. Separate yourself from the character, and you will have the second step to a brilliant D&D romance. Alright, step 3. This one is big. Remember how I mentioned earlier that DMs can create moments for the romance? Well, if any of you were wondering, oh my god, doesn't that sound Spotlight hoggy? I mean, yeah. Sometimes you're absolutely right on that. And that is step 3. Make sure that you are not hogging the spotlight with this romantic subplot. We see this a lot in a lot of those main character syndrome RPG horror stories where people spotlight hog, and these happen a lot for a reason. A lot of spotlight hogs don't realize that they're spotlight hogging. Now, I'm not saying that you should just not dedicate time to this romance at all, because I think that'll just make the romance bad, quite frankly. You need to dedicate at least some time to it, but don't think that your character's romance increases your character's, like, screen time or whatever. It just changes what your character is doing during the moments where they are prevalent. The other players still get their own moments in the spotlight. Your moments just change to focus on the romance that you are a part of. Now again, there's nothing wrong with having scenes that are dedicated to the romance. Again, going back to Ford and Jester, the jellyfish scene is one of my favorite scenes in all of Critical Role. I wouldn't want to take that away at all, but remember that jellyfish scene happened and then they moved on, and other players got their own chances to have the spotlight in that same Critical Role episode. That is a pretty good benchmark for what you should do. Make sure that you have scenes for the romance, but make sure that the romance doesn't take up more time from the other players. And also, while we're on the topic, just because 2 people are in this romance, or however many people are in this romance, doesn't mean the other players can't get involved as well. I mean, how many times did we have gossip between the entirety of the Mighty Nine about Ford and Jester or Bo and Yasha? That sort of thing was great. I mean, that sort of dynamic is really, really fun. I mean, gossip in general is just really, really fun. There's a reason why so many people do it. Having a little bit of that moment in your D&D game can really humanize the party. It can make them feel like more of a band of buddies, comrades, you know? Those sort of moments are great. You don't need to relegate a romantic subplot to just the two or however many people are in it. All of the party can be involved in some manner. I remember when Ginny D covered domestic Dungeons & Dragons and this exact same thing popped up. Just because two people are having like a wedding, for example, doesn't mean the other party members can't get involved with trying to forge the wedding rings or chasing off an unwanted suitor or something like that. The other party members can be involved. But anyway, look, point is, all of this boils down to don't spotlight hog. Make sure that this doesn't take up too much time, and make sure that you're not excluding the other party members from their own storylines. And finally, the final step is to have fun with it. I mean, romance can be a really intense or difficult to pull off plotline in D&D, or at least sometimes it can seem like that, but in truth, D&D romance is just another part of D&D. D&D, Dungeons & Dragons, a tabletop role-playing game. We're supposed to be having fun here. You don't need to make the romance anything except enjoyable. If you don't want to have friction in your romance, then don't. If that doesn't sound fun to you, then have a happy-go-lucky romance between two player characters or an NPC and a player character, whatever. Just have a good time. That is really all that matters. Do what you think is going to make this experience more enjoyable for the people at the table. I know that drama and all of that is super prevalent in romantic relationships on television and film, but that doesn't mean that you need to do that at your table if you don't think it's fun. And that also doesn't mean that you have to exclude drama if you want there to be friction and you want there to be some sort of crisis or a breakup even. If you think that that subplot would be interesting for the game, then do it. Just do what you think would be enjoyable. This is a game, and while romance can seem like some sort of extreme mountain that you have to climb, it's just another part of the game, and it should still be enjoyable for the players. The romance between Kali and Daphne in my first D&D campaign was one of my favorite parts of that campaign. Even though I didn't anticipate it when I started the game, when it ended off, I would not have had it any other way. It was a great moment, and I think it really helped to make the game all the better. And I hope that the same happens in your own D&D campaigns. Happy Pride, everybody. I hope you all have a wonderful month. If you guys enjoyed this episode, then please do leave a like. If you want to see more of my content, then you can check out Roll for Insight, where we interview artists, dungeon masters, YouTubers, etc., and get their opinions on all things Dungeons & Dragons. And finally, if you want to leave your own tips or thoughts, go down to the comments down below. If you can't think of a comment, leave the comment romance to let me know you made it to the end of the video. And that's like, comment, subscribe. I will see you all next time. Farewell.